Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Industry, a weekly video series produced by Automotive Fleet magazine. I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to examine what's occurring in the commercial fleet market for the week of October 5th, 2020. And I'd like to start today's report, as I've done with past weekly reports, by examining what we're hearing from commercial fleet managers and fleet suppliers on a variety of topics within the industry. And one of the key areas of discussion has been in the area of fleet sales trends. And when you look at overall fleet sales trends, especially for commercial fleets, and you look at it on a calendar year basis from January of this year to September last month, overall sales are down 24%, which is not a good number, obviously. But it does include an anomaly, and it includes that anomaly of the 2 lost months of production when the OEM assembly plants were shut down from mid-March until mid-May. And sometimes I feel the best way on assessing what current fleet trends are vis-a-vis same time last year is by examining it on a month-over-month basis. So when you look at September against August of this year, commercial fleet sales were down 6%. Which was expected, but not as bad as anticipated. And when you look at earlier months, when you compare August to July commercial fleet sales were down 17%. So, in terms of the trending, the sale decline appears to be decelerating. And that's in the commercial fleet segment. In other areas, sales are continuing to be dismal. When you look at rental sales, those are down right now 62%. But when you look at overall highlights, what are some of the highlights that are occurring in terms of 2021 commercial fleet acquisitions and what occurred in the prior year, 2020? One of the noteworthy observations is that hybrid sales are up. Secondly, the right-sizing initiatives are continuing. Fleet managers are being tasked to identify underutilized assets that are not being replaced. And this is getting increased attention due to the fact that more and more fleet vehicles now are equipped with telematic devices. Another observation in terms of overall fleet sales is that since Q1 2020, the average fleet age for vehicles has been trending upwards as many fleets have put their replacement plans on temporary hold. And this was especially true with work vans. Work vans are trending higher in terms of their overall months in service. Another key factor has been that budgets are getting tighter. But this is the important area to look at is not so much even this budget period, but looking at long-term budget plans. And here, the feedback that we're getting from fleet managers is that their management is asking them now to investigate keeping vehicles longer in service. And fleet managers are being forced to take a calculated risk vis-a-vis new vehicle acquisitions versus the possibility of increased maintenance costs and downtime. Another topic of conversation that comes up in our discussions with commercial fleet managers and fleet suppliers is in the area of maintenance. And depending on the type of fleet that you're operating, maintenance expenses are either flat or down, primarily due to fleet vehicles being driven fewer miles, resulting in fewer transactions. And although there may be fewer transactions, fleet suppliers do point out that the average transaction price has been increasing. And it's not really due to the pandemic. This has been part of a longer trend that's been occurring in recent years, and it's primarily being driven by the OEMs moving over to full synthetic motor oil and away from semi-synthetic blends. So this is causing transaction prices to increase because of the increased expense of synthetic motor oils. But what is impacting fleets during this pandemic period is the fewer miles being driven. And some fleets are now basing their preventative maintenance intervals strictly on mileage and moving away from a time or mileage interval basis. And this poses some potential risks, especially if issues come up while the vehicles are under warranty, and if a fleet is simply practicing oil changes on the basis of overall miles, there could be potential compliance issues that come into play there. But similar to what occurred in the recession of 2008-2009, there's a lot of similarities between what occurred then and the pandemic right now, is that there was an increase in unscheduled maintenance expenses as fleet managers extended vehicle service lives. And likewise, during this pandemic period, we're also seeing an uptick in the frequency of unscheduled maintenance that didn't occur in the pre-pandemic periods. And a lot of this is being driven again by the fewer miles being driven. We're starting to see increased number of expenses in terms of battery replacement costs, the need for service calls for battery jumps or unplanned tire repairs. Another impact that the pandemic has had in terms of maintenance expenses is that it's a global pandemic, so it's impacted overall global supply chains. Many replacement parts are imported from overseas. There's been delays in that, so that's resulted in an increased amount of back-ordered replacement parts that are out there, lengthening the time to get a repair job done. Another area that we're seeing increases in maintenance expense, and again, this is in the aggregate, has been brake wear. Brake wear is higher now in this pandemic period as opposed to the pre-pandemic period, and a lot of people are attributing that to the increase in the number of final mile deliveries, which is a lot of stop and go driving. It's the fastest growing segment in our industry, so there's an increased number of miles being driven by those fleets, and there's also an increased number of delivery vehicles in operation. So in the aggregate, this is increasing brake wear. Another factor is something that we're all aware of, is that during this period, the fleet drivers have been driving faster than normal, although that is decreasing now as traffic increases on the streets. But that's resulting in drivers driving faster to stops at traffic lights and stop signs, resulting in an increase in brake wear. Another factor that's driving maintenance expenses during this pandemic period has been the increased use of mobile maintenance services. And one of the factors behind this increase in mobile maintenance service is the desire to minimize contagion risk with drivers and outside area. So some fleets have adopted the mobile maintenance services businesses in order to maintain their vehicles, but there is a higher per transaction price there than opposed to going to a national account vendor. Another area that's related to maintenance expenses is the area of replacement tire expenses, and this comes up a lot in conversations with fleet managers and fleet suppliers. Tire costs are your third largest overall maintenance expense, and here the news is relatively good. During the pandemic, fleet replacement tire expenses have either remained flat or slightly decreased, and it's all being driven by the fewer number of miles being driven by fleet vehicles on average. And fewer number of miles increases the interval between the need to change tires. So that is being extended and thereby reducing overall costs. But there are certain areas that are emerging, and I kind of touched upon this earlier in the presentation, that are unplanned tire expenses, one of which is known as flat spotting. And what flat spotting means is it's a condition that occurs when a tire is stationary. It has the whole full vehicle load resting on top of that tire, and the area where that tire is in contact with a surface causes it to create that flat spotting and premature wear. So that is resulting in issues that we really didn't see as much in the pre-pandemic period. Another area that's emerged in terms of replacement tire expenses has been this increase in the amount of retreads. Fleets have been expressing more interest in retreads as opposed to new replacement tire expenditures, and it goes back to this whole cash conservation initiatives on the parts of a lot of fleets. But overall, total replacement tire expenses are flat when you're comparing 2020 against 2019. And so far, the OEM tire manufacturers have held off on any sort of price increases. And the forecast is that most people in the fleet industry anticipate replacement tire expenses to remain stable, at least for the first half of 2021. Historically, tire OEMs have increased their prices either in April or September, so if there is going to be any price increases, they most likely will be occurring in those time frames. And the final area that I'd like to cover in today's presentation is in the area of fuel prices. And fuel prices have pretty much been mirroring the economy. When the economy went into shutdown, fuel prices quickly decreased. As we emerged from the shutdown and business activity increased, likewise, fuel prices started to trend upwards. But one of the key observations we want to bring out has been this uptick in unnecessary idling. And that's primarily, this uptick is being attributed to the pandemic, as more and more field workers tend to use their vehicles as mobile offices as a way of social distancing and minimizing their contact with customers and the general public. Another observation that we want to bring up is, and this is primarily with larger fleets and those that have centralized fueling, but a lot of them now are increasingly investigating fuel hedging as a way to mitigate future price increases. The anticipation is that fuel prices should remain stable as we go into 2021. There are concerns about fuel prices going up in that April to May timeframe, as they traditionally do during the Memorial Day holidays. But with that, that concludes my State of the Fleet Industry presentation for the week of October 5th, and I'd like to thank you for listening.